The first thing that is needed to keep in mind is we are Roman Catholics attached to Rome, to the Bishop of Rome, to the Roman Pontiff, and that's a principle that we have always kept and will always keep. There is no way that at any time we would break away from Rome, from eternal Rome. We have many quotes of the Archbishop on that topic, and this is one of the points of the principle that we will always follow. Just 2 quotes here. What are we to do in regard to the authorities in their position, to lock ourselves in our resistance as in a tower of ivory, or rather to try to persuade the Roman authorities? I have not taken the course of breaking off communication with Rome. One of the quotes. Another one, which I find interesting, may the Church return to tradition, but by little steps, because it is difficult to do so all at once. Nevertheless, it must be evident that everything is in the process of turning toward normalcy, tradition, and the teachings of all time. So, 2 quotes among many, reminding us that we have never taken the course of breaking off with Rome in any way, and we continue to do so. It is true also that we need to make a distinction for many years, and a distinction that we need to continue to make, which is the distinction between the eternal Rome and the neo-modernist tendencies in Rome. Here also just 2 quotes from the famous declaration of 1974. Interesting to remember that 1974, Archbishop Lefebvre is a bishop of the Catholic Church in good standing, we would say, with perfect canonical recognition. The society exists already. He has his seminary and so on. And Archbishop Lefebvre was, I would say, strong enough to make this a statement. We hold fast with all our heart and with all our soul to Catholic Rome, guardian of the Catholic faith and of the traditions necessary to preserve this faith, to eternal Rome, mistress of wisdom and truth. We refuse, on the other hand, and have always refused, to follow the Rome of neo-modernist and neo-Protestant tendencies, which were clearly evident in the Second Vatican Council and after the Council in all the reforms which issued from it. Clear statements which are absolutely true today. We have to make that distinction between the eternal Rome and these neo-modernist tendencies in Rome that we refuse. The practical conclusion of this principle, of this attachment to Rome, is that we have always refused the temptation of sedevacantism as a lack of prudence in a judgment of the situation, and also, more deeply, a schismatic spirit as well as a dead end. That's positions of the Archbishop. The reasoning of those who deny that we have a Pope puts the Church in an inextricable situation, I would say, already long ago. And we detect a schismatic spirit behind those reasoning, and our society utterly refuses to follow them. So a clear statement, and that goes on in many occasions. Archbishop Lefebvre refused what is a temptation to break away from the Pope. The second principle, so we have that attachment to Rome. The second principle is that the reason of our position today and for the past decades is the defense of the Catholic faith. It is for that Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society along the years have kept that situation and our position. Certainly, another quote of the Archbishop, certainly the question of the liturgy and the sacrament is important, but it is not the most important. The most important question is the question of the faith. Yes, obviously. That's the reason of our Catholic resistance for so many years. It is a reason of our refusal of the new Mass. It's because of doctrinal reason. It's not because we like the old way. Because we like the vestments, the candles, the silent Mass. No, it's not the reason. It's not because of external reasons. It's really because the new Mass brings with it a new doctrine, a new theology, and endanger the faith about the Mass and also about many other dogmas. So our attachment to the Tridentine Mass is first because of Catholic doctrine. Not that the liturgy, the beauty of it, the easiness of praying during the Mass is not important. No, it is, but it's not the most important. What is really important is the defense of the faith. The reason of our opposition to the Second Vatican Council is also because of the faith. In defense of the faith, as the Council brought in new ideas, new teaching, new catechism, and so on. As a conclusion of that principle that we want to preserve for ourselves and for the Church the authentic Catholic faith, what we can see anyway over the years is that the firmness in keeping these principles has brought victories, results, I would say. We would say. It's by remaining firm about the Mass, for instance, that we were able, little by little, step by steps, little steps by little steps, as would say the Archbishop, we were able to bring back the Mass in the Church with the different authorization up to the motu proprio Summorum Pontificum, which is not perfect. It's not yet everywhere, but these are little steps, and it's by the firmness of our attachment to the Mass. In the same way, it's by the firmness in our attachment to the doctrine that we have been able to bring some, at least, discussions about Vatican II and so on, and starting to break that super dogma that was, and still is in many minds, that the Council, the Second Vatican Council, is in many, for many. In short, these are the principles that have always led us and continue to lead us in this time of crisis. Now, because I think it's important, I would like to go through a quick chronology or historical review. Won't take too long, don't worry. Won't go into all details. But I think it's important to have an overview of things because it helps to judge the actual situation. So, starting from the beginning, 1970, Archbishop Lefebvre founded the Priestly Society of St. Pius X. We know, 1917. 1974, so 4 years after, we have that declaration of the Archbishop with the quotation that I just gave a while ago. 1984, we have the Indult Mass. So before 84, the Latin Mass is absolutely abrogated, forbidden. There is no way to celebrate. Any priest that wants to celebrate it is persecuted, and so on. The first step in the restoration is under John Paul II, 1984, with unacceptable conditions, but still a step. 1986, we have Assisi, the first meeting in Assisi, and the strong reaction of Archbishop Lefebvre, seeing, of course, in this meeting a scandal for the Church and for the faithful. And it at that time that Archbishop Lefebvre, so in 1986, announced for the first time, really in public, his intention of consecrating bishops. That was a bomb, of course, in Rome, and triggered in 1987 the canonical visit by Cardinal Gagnon. So Cardinal Gagnon comes and visits many of our houses, seminaries, and so on, making an official visit. And it's the first time since the 70s that the society in some ways is recognized. Is it? Well, in a way, yes, because Cardinal Gagnon attend to ceremonies officially as a cardinal in the sanctuary and so on. Myself, I remember very clearly that I made my first engagement in the society as a young seminarian. So in the hands of Archbishop Lefebvre and with Cardinal Gagnon on the throne just aside. So I could feel very safe in going and starting with the society in that way. 1987 also, Archbishop Lefebvre signed a protocol and denied the day after, not seeing that Rome was ready, especially to give the society a bishop, and concluding that we cannot trust them because they refuse to give a date for the consecration of a bishop. And then he announced that in June 1988 he would consecrate 4 bishops. And as it was decided, they tried everything to stop him, but nothing stopped him. And he consecrated the 4 bishops. In 1988 comes the decree of excommunication for 2 reasons. For schism, because of the consecration of the bishops, and for a false notion of tradition. That's also in the decree of excommunication. An important point, because we'll see that it's something that in a way comes back in the actual preamble that they are proposing us. 1994, the election of Bishop Follet as the Superior General of the Society, re-elected in 2006. And during this time, from 1988 to today, 2011, there are multiple tries of obtaining compromise from groups and signing groups into the Ecclesia Dei Commission. I think there are about 13 different groups that received a canonical recognition in that time, from the Fraternity of St. Peter to, I believe, the last one, the Good Shepherd Institute. During that time also, we have in 2000 our pilgrimage to Rome, which made a great impression in Rome. The authorities in Rome are, impressed by the piety of the pilgrimage and by how it goes. At that time, we could see comments saying that it was the most pious pilgrimage of the whole year, and so on. Strong impression, which lead Cardinal Hoyos to make the first contact with the bishops. That's the first time during the pilgrimage that Cardinal Hoyos tried to enter into discussion with Bishop Vallée. And that's also the time, soon after, that Bishop Vallée asked for three signs that would be, that are necessary to rebuild the trust. That was exactly what it was about. It's not really conditions, it's just make some signs that you are really serious about. You say that you want to find a solution about the society. Well, give us some signs that you are serious about tradition. First sign, that priests can celebrate the Latin Mass. Make it available. Second sign, lift the excommunication of the four bishops. And then, when we have these two preamble signs, then we can discuss on the doctrine. We need to discuss the doctrine, what our position is. Remember, 2000, these signs were absolutely unthinkable. Even, you could read at that point that comments were made that Bishop Vallée was unreasonable to ask things like this. How can the Pope today make the Mass available and that priests would be allowed to say the Mass like this? Unthinkable. Lifting the excommunication. Are you crazy or what? Unthinkable as well. In 2005, there is the election of Cardinal Ratzinger as the Pope, Benedict XVI. In 2007, so 2 years after his election, there is a publication of the Motu Proprio, Summorum Pontificum, which allows extensive use of the extraordinary rite of the Mass. And January 2009, the lifting of the excommunication. And after that, from 2009 to today, 2011, starts these doctrinal discussions between the Society of St. Pius X and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It's the first time that Rome accepts to discuss doctrine with tradition. Before it was unacceptable, and first time, which is another little step. First time also that in Rome and outside, I would say, the circle of the society, some voices are attacking also the Second Vatican Council. We think, of course, of Monsignor Gherardini, but among a few others. And September 14, 2011, a date that we recall, a meeting between Cardinal Levada and Bishop Vallée, where a doctrinal preamble is handed over to Bishop Vallée, with the request that we would accept it and sign it, and then a canonical recognition could be given. That's the short overview of our history leading us to today. So what about that document of the Vatican? I think we need to look into two documents. First, the press release himself, which is only a press release, but it's still saying things, and also the interviews that Bishop Vallée gave after the meeting in the evening of September 14. I think the first hints that we can see in the document itself, it's just little hints, indications, not more than that, but they are there, is first the respect that is shown to the society and to Bishop Vallée and his assistant and so on. It's talking about His Excellency Bishop Fellay, Superior General of the Society of St. Pius X. Just a hint, nothing more. But obeying the Holy Father's will. It's the first time we hear from Rome that the Society of St. Pius X is obedient to the Holy Father's will. A hint, it's on one specific point. It's when the Holy Father requested this discussion between the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and the Society, but here we are, obeying the Holy Father. The discussions achieved their purpose, which was to clarify the respective positions and their motivations. Interesting. On their side also, they recognize what we have already said, that the discussion were successful in on their purpose, which was to clarify our positions, the respective positions, our and their positions, and our and their motivations. So I think it's more than a hint here, it's an important statement. Another point which is interesting, I mean, more on the amusing side, but they find a common point between the Pope and us is that hermeneutic of rupture. I quote, having considered the concern and request presented by the Society of St. Pius X in connection with respect for the integrity of the Catholic faith as opposed to the hermeneutic of rupture that interprets the Second Vatican Council as a break with tradition, and so on. So we agree on one thing, that there might be an hermeneutic of rupture in interpreting Vatican II. What we do not agree is that there can be an hermeneutic of continuity in reading Vatican II. That's not mentioned yet. The statement, the press release speaks about full reconciliation. We're not talking about full communion, which is a much more traditional possible term. A hint, nothing more. And, well, of course, it tells us that this doctrinal preamble was given. This preamble enunciates some of the doctrinal principles and criteria for interpreting Catholic doctrine that are necessary in order to guarantee fidelity to the magisterium of the Church and to sentire cum ecclesia, thinking with the Church, while leaving open for legitimate discussion the study and theological explanation of particular expressions or formulations found in the documents of the Second Vatican Council and of the subsequent magisterium. Long sentence. But that's what we know about the preamble. And I'm sure you would like to know if I read it. Well, no, I didn't read it. I will soon, but I didn't yet. So that's, you're surely very disappointed, but that's all I can tell you about it. What is interesting here, it's trying to define the magisterium of the Church. What can guarantee fidelity to the magisterium of the Church? We are back on the same discussions, and in a way, what was reproached to us in 1988, a false notion of tradition, a false notion of understanding the magisterium of the Church. That was what we were told in 1988, and in a way it comes back. Here, will we be able to agree on what the magisterium of the Church is? Hopefully yes, but it's not obvious, or not easy as well. So in 1988 we were accused of having a false notion of tradition. Here we are offered to agree on an understanding of what the magisterium of the Church and therefore what tradition is. Second point important in that long sentence is that is open for legitimate discussion, the study, and theological explanation of the documents of the Second Vatican Council and the subsequent magisterium. I would like here to quote the note from the Secretary of State in 2009, so not so long ago. The indispensable condition to any future reconciliation with the Society of St. Pius X is a full recognition of the Council Vatican II and the magisterium of Popes John the 23rd, Paul VI, John Paul I, John Paul II, and Benedict XVI. So they didn't miss any out. A note where there is no way of a recognition, reconciliation, call it as you like, with the society if there is not a recognition of the Council and the magisterium of the popes. We are told that this note was coming from the Secretary of State, not from the Pope himself, but nevertheless it was stated by the Vatican. Today, it's not anymore a question of a full recognition of Vatican II and of the magisterium of the popes, but leaving open for discussions the documents of the Council and the subsequent magisterium. We don't have the list of the popes, but it includes everyone. Interesting evolution there, once again. And then the press release speaks about, not in details, but about the possibility of a recognition, canonical recognition of the society. Only Father Lombardi, who is a Vatican spokesman, said on the same day, today the most likely solution would be a personal prelature, which is a church jurisdiction without geographical boundaries. And Father Lombardi also expressed the hope that the society would respond to the Vatican's offer within a few months. So it seems that in Rome they have understood that when they put pressure on Bishop Follet saying we want an answer tomorrow, it doesn't work, which they tried a few times in the past. So now we have a few months. Maybe next time we'll have a few years. I think what we can see is a real evolution over the time. That's why I went through the historical review and these documents with reference to some documents of the past years. We have a real evolution in what the Vatican is asking of us. And they are already certain things, certain points that are acquired facts that we have obtained. The first one, as I said, is the Mass. The Mass can be celebrated by any priest. It is therefore permissible to celebrate the sacrifice of the Mass following the typical edition of the Roman Missal promulgated by John the 23rd in 1962 and never abrogated as an extraordinary form of the liturgy of the Church. That's the Apostolic Letter, Summorum Pontificum, a big step, and it's a victory over these the years. And I think the second one, and that's new, in the past, really the past few years, it's that the Council can be discussed. It's open to discussion, and while leaving open for legitimate discussion. The Council is not anymore a super dogma that we have first to agree on, and then we can talk. It's to take a comparison, I think we have in front of us a wall, which is Vatican II, that is built in front of us, and now it's cracking. It's just cracking. It's the the first step in finishing the work, which will be to raise it down. We'll surely need some bulldozers to help us do finishing the work, but it's cracking, it's fissured already. It is because other voices are starting to criticize Vatican II. It is because it's open to discussions, and these are essential steps, little steps, in the restoration of tradition in the Church. Now, if we go to more practical things, what is the society going to do in the next few months? I don't know. You will tell me, well, why did you ask us to come to a conference where you don't have anything to announce us? Well, just for the fun. Didn't know what to do tonight, so well. No, I think what is important to remember is that first, the decision is an act of prudence. It's based on principle, the restoration of tradition of the faith, but it's based on our attachment to Rome and on the defense of the faith, the principle that I laid at first. These are the principles which there is no way we can put them aside, one or the other. There is no way. So the practical decisions is a question of prudence. Can we really think prudently that in going to an agreement, in the case that the conditions are laid in front of us are acceptable, is it prudent for us to go forward or not? And it's, is it not only prudent, but will that be good for the restoration of the Church? Because that's our goal. There is no other goal. It's, remember the quote of Archbishop Lefebvre at the beginning, are we going to stay in our ivory tower, or are we going to try to persuade the Roman authorities and bring them back to where they should be? So it's a question of prudence. Can we trust? And can we? Are there enough signs that we may believe and think that it's a prudent act to go in one direction or the other? And in the next few months, there is two decisions that need to be made. First is if the preamble, the doctrinal preamble, is acceptable or not. That's the first step, and I don't know because I have not read it, so I can't give you an opinion on that. But that's the first step. It is or it is not. According to the doctrine of the Church, do we agree on the magisterium of the Church or not? As announced in his interview, Bishop Ferré has asked superiors to come to a meeting in Albano on October 7 to discuss that. So we had already a meeting in Albano at those dates, but not everybody was obliged to go, and I declined the invitation because we have the conferences here in Kansas City on the same weekend, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. But I received a communication from the General House saying that you have no choice. So I will be there and flying back on Saturday, normally with Bishop Tissier, so that the conferences will take place, not exactly as scheduled, but they will all take place, no worry. Just pray that the flights are on time. First thing, is a preamble acceptable? And then second step, is the canonical proposition that they will possibly make after that acceptable or not? It's two different decisions. Not because we say the preamble is acceptable that the canonical solution is as well. Do we know at this point if the canonical situation is acceptable? No, not yet. We don't even exactly know what they want to offer. They have talked about this prelature, which is like a diocese without geographical boundaries, so kind of a diocese which is everywhere. But I'm not sure, and I am not a canon lawyer, so I will leave that to others to study the case, but I'm not sure that that would give us enough freedom from the bishops, from the local bishops, because obviously if we need permission from the bishops to open new houses, it's not really possible today. Not that it would not be normal in a regular situation of the church. Yes, it would be, but today it's like, who wants us? So we'll see that they talked also about an ordinariate like they gave to the Anglican, which seem at first look a more stable solution for us, as I think it would give a greater independence from the bishops, but it causes other canonical problems, so I'll leave that to the specialists. But that's the two decisions that will be needed in the near future. And it's mostly there, of course, based on doctrine, especially for the preamble, but after it's a question of prudence. And the only one who can make the decision is Bishop Vallée, and nobody else. Not you, not me, it's him. He will take advice, he will assess the situation, but he's the only one, and there is nothing you can do, I can do about it. That's how God works. That's divine providence. And it's a very important thing to remember today. I mean, you will see on the internet all kind of comments. People know much better than Bishop Vallée what to do, that's for sure, in one direction or the other, but it's the last deal. You know, you will never get that another time. Why not? Oh no, yes, maybe next year will be even better. We don't know. It's like, but yeah, so strong statements, or if you do it, you'll be dead. Sure, maybe, yes, I don't know. It's a prudential statement. And once again, only one can do it because he has been put in charge of the society, and not only of the society, because in the actual situation, he has been in charge of tradition in a way. That's how it is. That's how God works. In the same manner than in 1987 and 1988, there were only one who could decide to sign the protocol with Rome, to deny it the day after, and to consecrate the bishops. There were all kind of opinions among the priests of the society at that point, among the faithful, obviously, saying that if the archbishop consecrates bishop, that's the end of it. If he doesn't consecrate bishop, that's the end of it. But the only one who could make the decision was Archbishop Lefebvre, and our personal opinion would not have changed anything. That's, once again, how God works, because it's the responsibility of the bishop of making the decision, and important to remember that, because that even keeps us in peace. Why would we worry about decisions that we don't have to make? There's no reason. You know that when it's the decision of the family on the other side of the fence, well, if it doesn't affect you, well, too bad for them. Anyway, we have enough worries with the decision we have to make day to day. What is interesting to see is that Bishop Follet is acting in the same way that Archbishop Lefebvre did when he was put in about the same situation. They, both of them, never refused to go to Rome when they were asked. They never refused to discuss, especially to witness for the faith when it was possible. Archbishop Lefebvre never refused to look into a canonical agreement when it was offered, 1987, a protocol with a signature of the Archbishop. It means that he considered it, even if he denied it the day after, seeing that it was not the right time. It was not the principle, the idea of an agreement that he refused. It was the fact that it was not the right time. He could not trust that protocol at that time. So on principle, he never refused to look into a canonical recognition. There were some conditions, especially to be able to continue the work that the society had started and to be protected in Rome and also especially from the local bishops. They, both of them, in the same kind of situation, gathered and asked the advice of the superiors of the society, and so on, to see what the other would have to say, and then he will have to make the decision. And once again, only one can make the decision. It's not a democratic world, I'm sorry, but that's not how God works in the Church. So at this point, I have no idea what will be next. I am not a prophet, so I have no vision of the future. But we must pray. That's what we can do. And the reason of talking to you, because there is a reason, is mostly to make a call to unity. To really keep ourselves in unity. We are going to face a difficult time, whatever the decision is. Whatever. If it's no, it will be difficult. If it is yes, it will be even more difficult. Some see the agreement as a dream. No, it won't be. I think the fight will be even more difficult, but if it's a path to go, fine, we'll go through that road as well. But it's the unity that will make our strength, in any direction we go. Imagine if today we would have everyone who one day worked with the Archbishop in these 40 past years. If everyone had remained united to Archbishop Lefebvre and to what he started, how many would we be? How strong would we be? How faster things would go into the restoration of the Church? It's obvious that it would be much faster and much stronger. So what we don't need today is to start dividing with I think this, I think that, I prefer that way. Fine, well, but it's not your decision, it's not your call, and it cannot be. If you have a special revelation from God coming to you and talking to you saying this is the way to go, well, let us know. It might be. So let us not be divided. And what we can do definitely is to pray, is to offer rosaries and sacrifices, our duties of every day, and so on. That is concretely what we can do today. If you want to help that meeting on October 7, Feast of the Holy Rosary, where the superiors will be together to discuss and study this doctrinal preamble, well, pray the Rosary. Pray the Rosary, not only on that day, but from now on to there. I'm sure you do already, but that's concretely what you can do. You can offer sacrifices. We are in the middle of a Rosary crusade. Well, let's be more generous in doing it. That's what everyone, you and me, can do today, and that is in our power, and that's even our duty. If we don't, we are useless soldiers. We are not taking our rank in the battle. We are not doing what we are supposed to do to go against to fight, and we are not doing so. We are useless crusaders. So it's very important to try our best to be more generous in our daily life, trying to sanctify these days and praying and so on. If everybody would do that, I'm sure, I have no doubt that many more graces will be given to the Pope and to Bishop Fallet to make the right decision when he needs to do it.